It was late in the evening, a quiet night in Abilene, Texas, in the summer of 1996. Journalist Brian Bethel sat in his parked car outside a small strip mall, pen in hand, paying a bill before dropping it into a nearby mailbox. The lot was dimly lit, the flicker of a distant streetlight casting long, uneven shadows across the asphalt. It was the kind of mundane moment you forget the next day. Until it isn't. Without warning, two boys appeared next to his driver's side window. Brian hadn't seen them approach. There had been no sound, no footsteps, just a faint knock of knuckles on glass. Startled, he turned. They were around 12 or 13, wearing hooded sweatshirts and jeans, their skin pale under the sodium glow. Something about them struck him as wrong, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The taller boy spoke first. "We need a ride," he said flatly. "We forgot our money and need to go home to get it. Could you take us?" It was an odd request, but stranger still was the way they asked, too calm, too deliberate, like rehearsed lines. Brian's hand hovered near the door lock, but a knot of dread was already coiling in his stomach. As the taller boy continued, the words grew more insistent. "It won't take long. We're just kids. Let us in." That's when Brian noticed their eyes. They were solid black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye. No whites, no irises. Just an endless, inky void like a starless night sky. The realization sent a jolt of fear through him so sudden, so primal, that his hands began to shake. He fumbled for the gear shift. The boys' calm exterior faltered just slightly, their tone sharpening as they spoke again. "We can't come in unless you let us." The words felt heavy, predatory. Every instinct screamed at him to get away. Without a word, he threw the car into reverse, tires squealing against the asphalt as he sped out of the parking lot. In his rearview mirror, the boys stood motionless, watching him go. Later that night, he posted his account online, simply to get it off his chest. He hadn't expected anyone to believe him. But to his surprise, his words struck a chord, sparking a flood of similar stories from people who claimed they too had met strange children with eyes like black marbles. And so began one of the most enduring modern legends of the paranormal, the black-eyed children. When Brian Bethel typed out his experience and shared it on a paranormal message board in 1996, the internet was still young. Most online communities were small, insular places, collections of hobbyists and the curious. His post wasn't meant to spark a phenomenon, but it did. Within hours, comments began to trickle in. Some expressed sympathy. Others were skeptical, dismissing his encounter as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. But what stood out were the people who replied not with questions, but with stories of their own. One woman described a knock on her door one stormy night in rural Vermont, a boy and a girl, asking to come inside and use the phone. Something about their voices had left her cold, though she couldn't explain why. Only when she looked closer did she notice their eyes. Another man claimed he was followed to his apartment by two black-eyed children after a late shift at work. They stood in the hallway outside his door for almost an hour, knocking every few minutes, never raising their voices, never leaving. In the weeks that followed, the stories multiplied. Posts appeared in forums, then on dedicated websites. The phrase black-eyed children caught on quickly, and within months, it was as recognizable to paranormal enthusiasts as shadow people or alien abduction. Bethel himself was overwhelmed by the response. He gave occasional interviews and spoke frankly about his experience, always careful to frame it as a personal account. He never claimed to know what the children were or where they came from. To this day, he maintains his story as truth, though he's careful not to embellish or speculate beyond what he witnessed that night in Abilene. As the internet grew, so too did the legend. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, stories of black-eyed children found their way into email chain letters, then blog posts, then YouTube videos and podcasts. Each medium added a layer of reach and permanence, cementing the tale in modern folklore. What made the phenomenon unique was how quickly and consistently it spread. Unlike other urban legends, which often mutate and change as they're passed along, reports of black-eyed children tended to follow the same unsettling pattern. Ordinary people, truck drivers, parents, students, recounting encounters with eerily calm children, all of whom shared the same chilling detail: eyes as dark and featureless as ink. Some folklorists argue that Bethel's story marked a turning point in the way urban legends evolved. No longer confined to campfire circles or whispered small-town rumors, stories like his could now leap instantly from one side of the country to the other. The internet acted as a catalyst, accelerating and amplifying what might otherwise have been a forgotten anecdote. Yet, even in its ubiquity, the legend retained its potency. Each new report seemed to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. And the central question, the one Bethel himself still wrestles with, remained unanswered. Who or what are the black-eyed children, and what happens if you let them in? As more stories of the black-eyed children surfaced, certain patterns began to emerge. Details repeated so often they became hallmarks of the phenomenon. The encounters were rarely elaborate or theatrical. Instead, they were quiet, unsettling, and often mundane until the moment of recognition. Most accounts occurred at night. The setting was often a lonely road, a desolate parking lot, or a quiet suburban home after dark. People described hearing a knock at the door or a tap on the car window, followed by the sight of one or two children standing outside. Sometimes they appeared as young as 6, other times as old as 16. Their clothing varied, though it was often described as plain or oddly outdated. Simple hooded sweatshirts, dresses from another decade, or clothes that seemed mismatched. What set them apart, initially, was their demeanor. Witnesses almost universally described them as calm, polite even, but with a strange detachment. Their voices were flat, lacking the inflection and energy typical of children. Some said they spoke in an odd, stilted rhythm, as if reading lines they didn't fully understand. They often made a simple request: to use the phone, to come inside and wait for their parents, to be given a ride home. Always, they asked to be let in. It was only after a moment or two, when the initial unease had set in, that the observer noticed the most chilling detail. Their eyes, entirely black, not just dilated pupils, but completely devoid of color or light. No whites, no iris, only an endless void. For many, that realization brought an overwhelming sense of dread, often described as primal and irrational. Several witnesses reported feeling physically ill or disoriented in the presence of the children. A few even claimed to hear an odd humming or to feel an almost magnetic pressure, as if something unseen was pushing against them. And always, there was the sense that the children could not enter without permission. Accounts consistently mentioned that they would stand patiently, even when denied, but never forced their way inside. Some even grew frustrated when refused, their polite tone shifting to something more demanding, more menacing. But still, they would not cross the threshold uninvited. The consistency of these patterns, across decades, across geography, and across individuals who had never heard of each other, is one of the most curious aspects of the phenomenon. It is what separates the legend from a mere ghost story. These are not random apparitions, but something more structured, something that behaves according to rules. And that consistency, more than anything, is what keeps the question alive. If it is merely a legend, why do so many describe the same thing? Brian Bethel's account may have given the black-eyed children their name, but some argue the phenomenon existed long before 1996. Scattered stories, often overlooked, suggest that people have encountered similar figures as far back as the 1980s and perhaps earlier. One such case appeared in an obscure paranormal book from 1984, which briefly mentioned a man in rural Virginia who was awakened one night by the sound of children crying outside his farmhouse. When he opened the door, he saw 2 boys, pale and expressionless, asking to come in. The man reportedly slammed the door shut when he noticed their eyes, all wrong, as he later told his wife. Other early claims come from regional folklore. In Appalachian communities, tales circulate of coal-eyed children who roam the hills at night, knocking on windows and asking for food or shelter. Some believe they were spirits of children lost in mine collapses, their blackened eyes a sign of their tragic deaths underground. Yet these earlier accounts are fragmented, rarely documented with the detail of Bethel's story. Skeptics point out that human memory is malleable, and that these older stories may have been retroactively colored by the modern legend. Once Bethel's narrative entered public consciousness, it became a lens through which people reinterpreted their own unsettling memories. Still, the possibility lingers that the black-eyed children did not simply emerge in the digital age, but were waiting in the shadows long before we had a name for them. While believers insist that the black-eyed children are real and dangerous, many psychologists and folklorists offer a different explanation. They see the phenomenon as a mirror of our own fears, shaped by psychology, culture, and the way our minds process the unfamiliar. One key factor is a psychological effect called the uncanny valley. Humans are deeply attuned to recognizing other humans, particularly children, as safe and familiar. But when something looks almost human but not quite right, it triggers discomfort. The flat voices, the mismatched clothes, the dead black eyes, all of these fall into the uncanny valley, where recognition becomes revulsion. We feel fear because what we see seems human, yet something is subtly, profoundly wrong. Another factor is low-light vision and the unreliability of human perception in darkness. In dim light, the eyes struggle to adjust, and our brains fill in details. Pupils appear dilated, shadows deepen, faces blur. Many paranormal sightings, not just of black-eyed children but ghosts, shadow figures, and cryptids, happen under these conditions. It's possible that people, already in a heightened state of alert, misinterpret what they see. Then there is the power of suggestion. After Bethel's story went viral, it created a template. People who encountered something strange, perhaps even ordinary children behaving oddly, could subconsciously overlay those details onto the existing narrative. Once primed by a story, the human brain is remarkably adept at finding confirmation. Some experts liken the black-eyed children to other urban legends born from cultural anxieties. In the 1950s, the fear of alien abduction emerged alongside the dawn of the space age. In the 1980s, the satanic panic reflected fears of moral decay. The black-eyed children, first described in the 1990s, may represent unease about the loss of safety in familiar places. The idea that even our homes, cars, and quiet streets are not immune to intrusion. Sleep paralysis is also a factor worth considering. Many report seeing black-eyed children describe waking in the night, paralyzed and unable to speak, while figures with dark eyes stand at the foot of their bed. Sleep researchers have documented similar phenomena. Hallucinations triggered by the brain's inability to transition smoothly between sleep and wakefulness. None of these explanations fully account for every report, but they offer insight into why the legend persists. It taps into something primal. The fear of strangers. The fear of letting the wrong thing in. The fear that what appears harmless, a child, a knock, a simple request, may conceal something far more sinister. And so, even when dismissed as folklore, the black-eyed children continue to haunt us. Because deep down, we understand that fear does not need proof to feel real. Though the black-eyed children are often described as a uniquely modern phenomenon, their unsettling qualities echo through much older traditions. Across cultures and centuries, we find stories of beings who resemble children but embody something far stranger and more dangerous. In Japanese folklore, there is the Hidetsum Kozo, a childlike yokai with a single large eye in the center of its face. Though often portrayed as mischievous rather than malevolent, its sudden appearances at night, staring silently at passersby, create a similarly uncanny experience. Like the black-eyed children, it appears where it shouldn't, behaving just enough like a child to confuse and frighten. European myths tell of the changeling, a creature left behind when fairies stole a human baby. Changelings looked like ordinary children but acted oddly, silent, expressionless, and, some said, with eyes too dark or too knowing. In these tales, The changeling was a deception, a hollow imitation meant to trick a parent into caring for something inhuman. Then, there's the vampire. Many versions of vampire folklore include the rule that a vampire cannot enter a home unless invited. This detail is eerily similar to the way black-eyed children are reported to behave, waiting patiently, asking politely, but never crossing the threshold on their own. Even in modern fiction, we find parallels. Stories of alien hybrids, soulless dolls, or possessed children in literature and cinema all play on the same fear. The corruption of innocence, the danger hiding behind a familiar face. The motif of black, empty eyes appears in everything from ancient paintings of demons to contemporary horror films. Some scholars argue that these parallels reflect a universal human unease with the liminal, beings that straddle categories we expect to remain separate. A child is meant to be harmless, yet here is a child who provokes terror. An invitation into our home is meant to be an act of kindness, yet here it feels like a trap. Throughout history, these contradictions have fueled our darkest stories. What makes the black-eyed children distinct is the way they synthesize these archetypes into a single, modern form, an urban legend that feels ancient and contemporary all at once. Perhaps that's why the stories resonate so strongly. They don't just frighten us because of what they are, but because they remind us of what we already know, that sometimes what knocks at the door is not what it seems. Not everyone who hears about the black-eyed children is convinced. As with most paranormal phenomena, the stories have attracted skeptics and debunkers alongside believers. Skeptics argue that the accounts are simply the product of suggestion and exaggeration, a modern campfire tale born in the fertile ground of early internet forums. Once Brian Bethel's account became popular, it gave people a script: strange child, black eyes, odd request. Any unsettling experience could be reframed to fit the pattern. Others point out that black contact lenses, which cover the entire eye and create the same effect described in these encounters, have been available since the mid-1990s. Could at least some of the stories be hoaxes, carried out by pranksters who knew of the legend and wanted to frighten someone? There are also natural explanations. Certain medical conditions can cause the eyes to appear darker or even completely black in low light. Some children with aniridia, a rare disorder where the iris is absent, can appear to have fully black eyes. Though rare, it's possible such conditions are misinterpreted in a heightened moment of fear. And yet, believers remain steadfast. They argue that too many accounts have come from people with no apparent motive to lie, often describing their experiences with evident distress years later. Many insist they didn't know of the legend at the time, and that the black-eyed children they encountered exuded something more than just a physical presence, a feeling of deep, unnatural wrongness. This divide between those who dismiss the legend as fiction and those who feel they have truly met something unexplainable has kept the debate alive. The black-eyed children occupy a space between certainty and doubt, a story that resists easy explanation. And in that space, they thrive. As the legend grew, so too did media interest. In the years following Bethel's story, the black-eyed children began appearing in documentaries, television specials, books, and countless articles. One of the most notable was an episode of Monsters and Mysteries in America, which brought several new witnesses forward to share their accounts on camera. Some of these stories bore remarkable similarities to Bethel's: late-night knocks, polite but insistent requests, a sudden rush of terror at the sight of black eyes. Others added new wrinkles: children who disappeared into thin air, or who seemed to know private details about the witness's life. Books on the subject have compiled hundreds of such testimonies. In one, a delivery driver recounted stopping to help what appeared to be a lost girl on a deserted road, only to have her step closer and whisper, "You'll let me in now," her eyes reflecting nothing but darkness. In another, a mother described waking one night to find two children standing silently at the foot of her bed. Despite the media attention, no definitive evidence has ever emerged. No clear photographs, no credible video, no trace of the children beyond eyewitness testimony. And perhaps that is part of the legend's staying power. Like so many pieces of modern folklore, It lives in the space between proof and belief, feeding on uncertainty. For each person who dismisses it as a hoax, there's another who swears they've seen those black eyes watching them from the shadows. What is it about the black-eyed children that keeps us talking decades after that first post in 1996? Why does this particular story endure while so many others fade? Part of the answer lies in the way it speaks to one of our oldest fears, the fear of the unknown entering the spaces we consider safe. A knock at the door is, in most contexts, nothing at all, even a welcome sound. Yet when the night is quiet and the knock comes from strangers asking to be let in, it can feel like a violation. It reminds us how thin the walls of safety really are. The fact that the intruders appear as children makes it even more effective. Children are supposed to be innocent, vulnerable, in need of protection. But here, they are something else entirely, calm, detached, and quietly menacing. It's a reversal of what we expect, and that inversion unsettles us on a deep, instinctive level. Then there's the way they ask. The idea of a creature, whatever it may be, needing permission to cross a threshold has roots in myths and religious traditions the world over. The very act of saying yes or no becomes a test, a choice between caution and empathy. That choice is central to the fear these stories evoke. What if you make the wrong one? Finally, they haunt us because they are never fully explained. There is no evidence, no clear origin, no resolution. Each encounter ends with the same unanswered question. What would have happened if I had let them in? And that question is enough to keep people awake at night. On certain nights in Abilene, Texas, the strip mall where Brian Bethel first met the black-eyed children is just as quiet as it was in 1996. The parking lot is still dimly lit, the same long shadows stretching across the pavement. Sometimes, curious visitors come by, hoping to see something, hear something, feel something. Most leave with nothing more than a chill. But even now, reports continue to surface. In small towns and big cities alike, people still tell of children appearing on porches and outside car windows, always with the same black eyes and the same polite, insistent requests. Each story is another variation of the same unsettling theme. In Oklahoma, a woman claimed she was followed home by two boys she'd seen earlier at a gas station. In Maine, a man swears he woke up to knocking and found a girl in outdated clothes standing on his porch. In California, a truck driver says he saw a pair of black-eyed children walking barefoot on the side of the highway at 3 in the morning. The details change slightly, but the core remains the same. A knock in the night, a polite request, an inexplicable fear, and always the unspoken warning, don't let them in. For many who encounter them, it's not the memory of what happened that lingers, but the possibility of what didn't. The quiet thought that someday someone will say yes. If you hear a knock tonight, would you? The story of the black-eyed children is more than just a modern legend. It's a reflection of the things that have always frightened us. Strangers at the door, danger cloaked in innocence, choices we can't take back. It reminds us how easily the familiar can become strange, and how little we really know about what moves through the world around us when the lights go out. Perhaps that's why the story endures. Because even if you don't believe, even if you dismiss it as nothing more than internet folklore, you still might find yourself glancing at the door when you hear an unexpected knock. You still might hesitate just for a second before opening it. And in that moment, the legend lives on. We tell ourselves that stories like this don't matter, that they're just fiction. But sometimes, fiction has a way of finding the cracks in our certainty, seeping in like a draft through a closed window. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows are long, you find yourself wondering, what if? What do you think of today's story? What dark chapter should we open next? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter